Hello and welcome to Pitboards and Podiums with me, Maya Westwick. In today's episode, we are going to be doing a driver profile on George Russell, so buckle up and let's talk F1. Alright guys, so as I said, today we are focusing on George Russell. George currently drives for the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula 1 team, which is why we're doing him today. Just kind of rounding out this week talking about Mercedes F1. So George was born on the 15th of February 1998. He is 25 years old and he is an Aquarius. He was born in Kings Lynn in Norfolk. He's the youngest of 3 children and he took up karting at the age of 7 after spending lots and lots of time around kart tracks because his older brother Benji was involved in competitive karting. He also credits Benji as being the reason that he has the race number 63 because that was his brother's race number, and then when he started karting he took up that number and then kept it throughout his career. As I said, he currently drives for Mercedes. He has done since 2022. In 2022, he also moved to Monaco, so that was kind of a big year for George. But previously, he did race for Williams F1 from his debut in 2019 to the end of the 2021 season. George, in his junior career, won several karting championships. He was awarded the McLaren Autosport BRDC Award in 2014, which made him the youngest ever winner of that. And as part of that, he earned £100,000 in cash as a prize. He got a club membership for the BRDC, the British Racing Drivers Club, and he also got an F1 test drive with McLaren, which he then did in October 2015 in an MP4 26 at Silverstone, which is pretty cool considering he would have been about 16 at the time. Also in 2014, he won the BRDC Formula 4 Championship. And then in 2017, he won the GP3 Championship, and in 2018, he won the FIA Formula 2 Championship. Now, the latter of those, the GP3 and Formula 2 Championships, were both won in his rookie year in that series. His relationship with Mercedes goes back to 2016 when he performed simulator work for them. He then went on to sign with the Mercedes Junior Driver Programme in early 2017, and he drove in a Formula 1 weekend for the first time in 2017. That was for Force India in the first practice sessions of both the Brazilian and the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, because if you didn't know, all of the Formula 1 teams, unless they have a rookie in their team that year, have to give a certain amount of first practice sessions per year to a rookie driver. And he's the one that did that in 2017 with Force India. For the 2018 season, so while he was in Formula 2, he was appointed Mercedes reserve driver, which would mean that if anything was to happen to either of the Mercedes drivers, Valtteri Bottas or Lewis Hamilton, that meant that they couldn't race, then George would be called upon to take part in the race for Mercedes. Following his Formula 2 win in 2018, he signed with Williams F1 and made his F1 debut at the 2019 Australian Grand Prix, along with fellow rookies Alex Albon and Lando Norris. His teammate at Williams was the much experienced Robert Kubica. Robert Kubica was an incredibly experienced driver in Formula 1 and in other series, and towards the end of his F1 career, he didn't have as great results, but he was in a car that was the worst car on the grid. He also did have an accident quite a few years ago. That meant he kind of had to restart his career a little bit once he'd recovered from it. But still, he was an incredibly experienced driver and someone that was very good for George to be partnering in his rookie season to be able to learn from. George ended the 2019 Formula 1 season, so his first season in the sport, in P20 in the championship, so last, and he ended it being the only driver to not score any points at all. That was due to the Williams being the slowest car on the grid. He pretty much only ever qualified in P19, and the Williams did not have the speed. The car was not fast enough for him to be able to get himself up into points positions, especially when he's a rookie and he's still learning about F1. Although he did actually out-qualify his teammate Robert Kubica at every Grand Prix weekend. So even though Robert Kubica managed to score better race results, George did out-qualify him every week. George continued driving for Williams in 2020, but this time his teammate was Nicholas Latifi because Robert Kubica retired from Formula 1, and he continued to have another fruitless season. Again, he had multiple races where he was within touching distance of scoring points and then wasn't able to, sometimes due to driver errors, sometimes it was his own fault, a lot of the time it was mechanical errors and things like that. Towards the end of the 2020 season, however, because obviously was very affected by COVID, it was a shorter season, and obviously drivers and team members, they had to be tested multiple times, every single weekend. It was very, very strict on all of that sort of thing. And if anybody did have COVID, obviously they weren't allowed to take part in that Grand Prix. So George did actually stand in and drive for Mercedes at the Sakir Grand Prix in 2020. He stood in for Sir Lewis Hamilton when he had COVID, and he looked on course to win that race. So bearing in mind, at this point in his entire 2 seasons with Williams, he's not even scored a single point yet. Towards the end of the 2020 season, once he's in a car that's an absolute rocket ship, it looks like he's going to actually win the race. It kind of silenced the naysayers and really showed everyone that he is an incredibly talented driver. He was unfortunately denied his first victory at the Sakir Grand Prix, and that was due to a combination of strategic errors from Mercedes and a punctured tyre. So none of it was even his fault. It wasn't that he'd made a mistake. It was just really bad luck for him. He ended up finishing the race in P9, so he did earn his first ever F1 points. He got 2 points for finishing P9, and then he also got 1 point for getting the fastest lap of the race. But obviously he was very disappointed with that because he'd spent the majority of the race leading the race and he thought he was going to win it. He'd qualified that weekend in P2, missing out on pole to the other Mercedes driver, Valtteri Bottas, by 26 milliseconds, so by literally nothing at all. And then he led the race until there was 20 laps remaining, when he pitted for new tyres, and the Mercedes mechanics accidentally fitted Valtteri Bottas's tyres to his front tyres. And obviously that's something that's not allowed. Like, there's a certain amount of tyres allocated to each car. It's not to each team, so they can't just be like, oh, well, it's fine, it's got the right tyre compound. They can't do that. So the mechanics had accidentally fitted 2 of Valtteri Bottas's tyres and 2 of George's tyres to George's car. So then the next lap, George had to pit again for them to rectify what they'd done. And then he managed to recover back up to second place, and he started chasing Sergio Perez down, who was in P1. And then he suffered a slow puncture and he was forced to pit once again, which obviously meant that then that's why he ended up finishing the race in P9. He did end up finishing the 2020 season in 18th in the championship with just those 3 points from Mercedes, which of course is an improvement from his previous efforts, but it's not where he wanted to be, and he was absolutely gutted after the events of what could have been in Bahrain. He was retained by Williams for the 2021 season alongside Nicholas Latifi, so it was the 2 of them once again, and there was a lot of speculation for pretty much the entirety of the 2021 season that George would be replacing Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes for the 2022 season. It was well known that Valtteri Bottas was only ever on 1-year contracts at Mercedes. He never really had the stability of knowing each season that he definitely would have a seat for the next season. And pretty much from the first race of the year, there was talk about George moving to Mercedes, especially after the performance that he put in the previous year in Bahrain. And amid all of this speculation, which was of course putting pressure on him to perform well to try and earn this seat, putting pressure on Valtteri Bottas to try and retain his seat, all of that, there was a very, very controversial moment at Imola, at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, where he collided with Bottas. It had rained and the surface of the track was wet, the grass next to the track was wet, and George basically, in an attempt to overtake Valtteri Bottas, drove onto a wet patch and lost control of his car completely. It caused both cars to retire, and it prompted a red flag because there was that much debris that they had to clear up, and it wasn't safe for the race to carry on going while they did that. Initially, he did actually blame Bottas for the incident, and there was a bit of a problem with his attitude towards that because he was very angry. He literally got out of his car and went and hit Bottas on the head while Bottas was still in his car. It wasn't the kind of behaviour that you want to see from a driver. When he was talking to the media, he did very much blame it fully on Bottas, although later on he did, after obviously he must have seen what actually happened and realised that it was him that was at fault, he did retract all of the things that he'd said, and he apologised both to Bottas and to Williams, because when he was making that move on Valtteri Bottas, I think he was literally trying to overtake him for P9, which for Valtteri Bottas is nothing. Like, that man has scored so many podiums with Mercedes. P9 in a Mercedes for Bottas was nothing, but for George in a Williams was still an incredible race result for him to be able to achieve if he was able to achieve it. Also, in the 2021 season, obviously I've spoken before about the controversial Belgian Grand Prix that year at Spa-Francorchamps, about how it was so weather affected, both on qualifying and the race, about how the race didn't even happen. It was literally 2 laps behind a safety car, so there was no opportunity to overtake. The only way that anybody would have made any positions up is if somebody in front of them crashed out of the race. That's literally the only way it would have been able to happen. But at that Grand Prix, George actually managed to qualify in P2 on the Saturday when the session was affected by the weather. He just got out there at the perfect opportune moment and managed to qualify and put a beautiful lap together, qualifying P2 behind Max Verstappen. So that was Williams' first front row start on the Formula 1 grid since 2017. And then on the race day itself, after hours and hours and hours of delays, obviously the race then ultimately consisted of 2 laps behind the safety car, which meant that Russell kept his second place position from qualifying. So he was technically a podium finisher in that race that wasn't really a race. And that meant that he was able to claim his first ever Formula 1 podium, very unconventionally, not the normal way you'd expect to do it. But in terms of statistics and in terms of his racing record, he claimed his first ever Formula 1 podium and he scored half points for it. So they didn't get 4 points for that race, they got half points. So instead of getting 18 points for P2, he got 9 points. And he ended up finishing the 2021 season in 15th in the Drivers' Championship, scoring a total of 16 points. So, there's a level of improvement there. We're getting better year on year. At the end of the 2021 season, after the whole year of speculation about who was going to be driving for Mercedes in 2022, it was announced that George would be going to Mercedes and Valtteri Bottas would be moving to Alfa Romeo. So that meant that for the 2022 season, George would be driving for Mercedes alongside Sir Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, 2022 was the first year of Mercedes' dominance ending. However, it's still a much better car than George had. So he actually was able to achieve his first victory in F1 at the 2022 Sao Paulo Grand Prix in Brazil. And he ended up finishing the season 4th in the championship with 275 points. So he obviously won 1 race, he got 4 fastest laps and 8 podium finishes. He was retained by Mercedes for the 2023 season, the season just gone, alongside Sir Lewis Hamilton again. And he ended up finishing the season 8th in the championship this year with 175 points. He got 1 fastest lap and 2 podium finishes. And he extended his contract to race with Mercedes to the end of 2025, as did Sir Lewis Hamilton. So unless anything kind of happens in terms of silly season, expect to see it be George and Lewis until the end of 2025 at least. George has openly said that he didn't get it right in 2023. Partway through the season, he kind of said he knew he was out of the running in terms of the Drivers' Championship. All he could do was try and contribute for the team to get the Constructors' Championship, just get as many points as possible, because he knew that he was not having the season he needed to have if he wanted to be anywhere near the running for any of the top positions in the Drivers' Championship. And obviously we can see that in terms of him finishing 8th in the championship, whereas Lewis finished 3rd. Obviously the year before, in 2022, I've spoken about this in the Lewis episode last week, when Lewis was doing all the developmental work for Mercedes and George wasn't doing that work in the first half of the season. George did outscore Lewis during the first half of the season, and then Lewis outscored George in the second half of the season, but George had already got enough points that he finished like 35 points ahead of Lewis, I think. So he has proven himself to be a very good driver. He's proven himself that he can hold his own against one of the greatest Formula 1 drivers of all time. He's shown that. And I think it'd be very interesting if Mercedes are back in the running in 2024. They've said that the W15's design is completely different to the W13 and W14. So hopefully this year's car will actually be good and they won't be fighting it and they won't have all the issues that they've had with the previous 2 seasons. I think it'd be very interesting to see what could happen. We could have George in the running for a World Drivers' Championship if the car is behind him and if he doesn't make any mistakes, because there definitely have been moments in the 2023 season that the pressure has got to him and he has made mistakes. So I think it was Singapore. My memory's so bad. I think it was at Singapore last year. I could be wrong. It's the race where Carlos Sainz won and Lando Norris was P2, Lewis Hamilton P3. Until the very last lap, George was in P3. He was going to get a podium finish. He was chasing Lando down. Potentially was going to get P2 from Lando. But Lewis was chasing George down. And the pressure from that situation led to him to make a mistake and he ended up crashing out of the race. So instead of it being that he comfortably got a P3 finish, even lost out that position to Lewis and got a P4, it's better than getting nothing at all. And he did end up crashing out of the race on the very last lap of the race because he made a mistake. So it's going to be very interesting to see if he is able to remain, cool, calm, collected, to not let the pressure get to him, and to see what he can achieve with a car that's actually up there at the top of the grid again. Because Mercedes, the last couple of years, they have had to drag it where they've got it to. It's not been something that's worked for them. So far in his career, George has achieved one victory. That was at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix that I mentioned in 2022. And he's got one pole position, which was in Hungary, and 6 fastest laps and 11 podium finishes. He's got 469 career points. Considering for the first few seasons of his time in Formula One, he was getting 0 points, 3 points. That's a huge amount of points to have accrued over basically 2 seasons. And he also is actually the director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association. He replaced Romain Grosjean following his departure from Formula One to IndyCar a couple of years ago. So it was George Russell and Sebastian Vettel until Sebastian Vettel left. Basically, the GPDA is there to protect the interests of the Formula One drivers, to represent them, and any issues that any of the drivers have in terms of race weekends and all of that sort of thing. It's basically George's job, alongside all of his actual racing, to bring those problems up and get them addressed. So, he could have an issue that he needs to raise with the president of the FIA or something like that, that he is doing on behalf of all of the drivers. So that is everything that I was going to say for my George Russell driver profile. I think he's definitely a driver with a lot of potential, and it would be very, very interesting to see what he can do in the coming years. At his time with Mercedes, I think, every racing driver has to believe that they are one of the best to be able to be where they are. They've got to have that sort of belief in themselves. And George has come under fire a lot for some of the comments he's made comparing himself to Lewis, because obviously Lewis is undisputedly one of the best drivers we've ever had in Formula One. And George will just very boldly say that he's on par with Lewis, if not better. And I think it'd be interesting to see if he can prove himself, to be quite honest. I think it's a very bold thing for him to say. It's a very bold comment to make. And let's see if he can actually back it up with any results. So yeah, thank you very, very much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to rate, like, subscribe, comment if you're on somewhere you can comment, anything at all. And also do share the podcast if you are enjoying it. I would really, really appreciate that. If you want some more Formula One content, you can always follow the podcast TikTok, which is at Pitboards and Podiums. I post things on there as well as doing the podcast. So recently I've discussed the news about Haas, about Gunther Steiner, about Ayo Komatsu, and I also can post supplementary things on there to the podcast. So with this week's F1 for Beginners episode, obviously I spoke about the flag system in Formula One. So then I posted onto the podcast TikTok like a little infographic series that I made explaining it so that you can see them as well as just hear me talk about it on the podcast. So all of that sort of thing is over there if you want some more Formula One content from me. If you just want more content from me in general, you can follow me over on Instagram at Maya Westwick _, which is MAIAWESTWICK and then an underscore. And I will see you in a few days for Lando Norris's driver profile. So we've got that next Wednesday, and then of course another F1 for Beginners episode, and then next Sunday we have got Oscar Piastri's driver profile. So I'm doing the McLaren boys next weekend because McLaren is my team. So I want to talk about them. But yeah, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye!